Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq, with daily insight on the Nasdaq-100 index, or the NDX, which is made up of 100 of the largest domestic and international non-financial innovative companies listed right here on the Nasdaq stock market. The NDX has been the barometer for U.S. large cap growth and also one of the best performing indexes over the last decade and a half, not to mention one of the most liquid index ecosystems in the world. Ben Jones, product development specialist with Nasdaq Index Research, joins me this afternoon to discuss Nasdaq-100 performance from a cap weight and equal weight perspective. And Ben, this certainly is the right time to have this discussion, as investors are increasingly concerned about the concentration of outperformance in a handful of Nasdaq-100 stocks. So let's take a look at your first chart here and tell us what the data shows.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Happy Friday, and it's good, I think, to kind of provide some perspective as we continue to march forward through 2020. And what this chart shows you is essentially the Nasdaq-100 index compared to two other indexes. It's being compared against the S&P 500, as we all know, kind of one of the primary market benchmarks, and also the Nasdaq-100 equal-weighted index. And from time to time, I like to show this picture because I think it provides a good indication of kind of what's really happening in the marketplace with respect to the Nasdaq-100. Essentially what you see here is the Nasdaq-100, which is going to be cap weighted, so it's going to be oriented towards the largest names within the index, right? And so when you look at the Nasdaq-100 underneath the hood, top 5 names account for well over 40% of the index. But the equal-weighted index is essentially looks at all these names equally, and they have essentially the same weighting. And so it gives a good indication of the depth and breadth internally. So you don't have just the largest names kind of pushing the index forward. And here's what's important about this image. What you see is the Nasdaq-100, year to date, is up over 37%, right? But what's important is that the Nasdaq-100 equal-weighted index is competitive as well and is up about 19% year to date. Both the Nasdaq-100 cap-weighted and the Nasdaq-100 equal-weighted are outperforming the S&P 500 year to date. Which is important, right? Because the S&P 500, good bellwether for the market, 500 names. But what's really interesting here is, it's not just about the concentration, right? If you look at the S&P 500, the equal weighted is down, 3.68%. So this shows you that, the 100 names that are comprised in this index are competitive and are outperforming. And a lot of this outperformance we saw in just the month of August, right? In August, the Nasdaq 100 cap weighted is up almost, 10%. The average, performance that we see in August for this index is around 0.4%. So, just as 2020 has been a strange and difficult and troubling year, we just saw it buck another trend as the Nasdaq 100, continues to outperform and had a really strong August.
So Ben, you also have a couple of side-by-side charts here from Nasdaq Dorsey Wright. These are what's called point and figure charts. What are you looking at here?
Yeah, so I wanted to show these because, we see the Nasdaq 100 cap weight outperforming. We see the equal weighted being competitive as well. These charts has a nice, picture of kind of some of the internal strength that we're seeing on an absolute basis. And these are charts pulled from Nasdaq Dorsey Wright. What you see here with the point and figure, the X's and O's, X means this indicator is rising, O's means this indicator is falling. And so what are these indicators? What are we looking at here, Jill? So what you're looking at is essentially two technical indicators. The first one is the 30-week for the Nasdaq 100. This is measuring the percent of stocks in the Nasdaq 100 that are trading above their 30-week moving averages. On the right-hand side is the 10-week for the Nasdaq 100. So this is measuring the percent of Nasdaq 100 stock components trading above their 10-week moving average. So the idea is that if you see more stocks within the index trading above these important moving averages, that means you're seeing plenty of breadth, you're seeing some absolute momentum as well, because in order to trade above, let's say, that longer term moving average, you're going to have to be doing what, Jill? Rising in price. And so what's important is that both of these indicators are trading at high levels, which means that you're seeing plenty of participation across the board internally, right? So if you look at the 30 weeks, so about 84% of Nasdaq 100 components are trading above their long-term 30-week moving average. Meanwhile, about 80% are trading above their 10-week moving average. So it's a good classic kind of technical sign that you're seeing some strong internal momentum. If you just look at the index itself, so just tracking the index and comparing it against some of these moving averages, we saw back in April when the Nasdaq 100 moved above its 50-day moving average. We saw about mid-June when we saw, kind of the 50 move above its 150. So this is not just a recent phenomenon. We've seen a lot of, classic evidence of momentum supporting the Nasdaq-100 going back a few months now.
And then, of course, investors are focused on the impact of the national election on the market. How has the Nasdaq-100 performed in election years?
Yeah, so I wanted to bring this up because, again, I mean, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen. But I think looking at history provides a nice guide to kind of know where we are today and potentially what could happen tomorrow. So if you look at just history and precedent, we do know that this year has been quite a strong year for the Nasdaq-100, up north of 37%. This is typically not the norm for election years for this index. Again, you've had some really bad bear markets during election years. Think 2000, think 2008. So if we look at this year, it's been quite strong. On average, the Nasdaq-100 is down about 9.12% during the full presidential election years. That does not include this year. So you can just see just how the 2000 market and 2008 market really impacted it. Overall, though, we tend to see some strength. That's been what we've seen lately. Think 2012, think 2016, where the Nasdaq-100 was up about 17.56 and about 4.74% respectively. What I think is interesting, though, is that if you look at history as a guide, we tend to see some volatility and weakness in that September-October time period. So you think, end of August is next week, what do we typically see, at least from a historical perspective, during those 2 months? During election years, we typically see, the index down about 4.7%. So that is a sign that, hey, we could expect some weakness, but we know 2020 has been different. So if you look at, kind of non-election years during this time period, September, October, the NDX and Nasdaq-100 is typically up about 2.7% on average. So again, we don't know what's going to happen, but I think some of this data can certainly help you make some decisions or just kind of know, hey, how we typically see these indexes behave during this time of year, during this part of the election cycle.
All right, Ben, great stuff. Thanks so much for joining us. Happy Friday.
Thanks, Jill. Have a good weekend.
You got it, you too. And thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.